Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this planning meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. The first order of business is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, and we have nothing under that. The next item is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. None declared. And this evening we have 3 public meetings. And the first meeting is zoning bylaw amendment for Jackie Prees and Jay Anderson on 27 Bayview Point. This meeting is for information purposes only, so it's an opportunity for council to ask questions and clarify anything about the application, and our staff will present a report, and they will come back and the public to comment on the application. And staff will come back with a recommendation at a further planning meeting for the committee's disposition. So, with no further ado, I'll turn it over to our planner, Leah Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, so thank you for that introduction. We'll move right into the purpose of the rezoning application is to essentially facilitate the reconstruction of an existing single detached dwelling. Substantial portion of the home, almost entirely the whole home, is within the EP zone. When we take a look at the mapping in just a moment, you will see that there is a portion of the property that is in the residential zone. However, it's the desire of the applicants in this case not to use a substantial portion of the existing dwelling, but instead to tear down the dwelling and rebuild. The majority of the rebuilt home will be on the existing footprint in the EP zone, but also with an addition in the residential zone towards Bayview Point, the municipal road allowance. Currently, the home, where it is in the EP zone, holds what's known as a legal non-conforming status. It's a legal home that was built prior to the passage of this zoning bylaw from 2006. In the EP zone, we do not allow new residential structures, hence the non-conforming aspect. Again, once the house is torn down, the legal non-conforming status is lost, and property owner must apply for a zoning amendment to allow for that home to be built. An aerial there shows us where the subject property is. I'm sorry the red line isn't overly loud, but hopefully we can see it, surrounded by residential homes and Lake Huron. Municipal water, but a private septic system is how this lot is serviced. And the road is a year-round municipal road access. So we're taking sort of the, again, north being at the top of the site plan in this case. The blue portion of the dwelling represents the existing footprint, with the red in front of it and closer to the road being the addition. So those lands are proposed to be zoned in a residential zone according to the underlying zoning. And the permission to rebuild the new dwelling would stay in the environmental protection, but with a special provision to allow for that. Some concept drawings for elevations just for your information. We have design elevations here from the front of the proposed home, the left, from the back of the house, and of course, when evaluating a zoning bylaw amendment application, we look first to the policy framework. We are dealing with lands that are within primary urban area, known as an urban settlement area, and residential uses within urban settlement areas are encouraged at the provincial level, at the county level, and also in the town zone local official plan. It is a primary urban community, this Lakeshore community. Designated for the most part, a little more than half in environmental hazard, but the brown zoning is reflecting where the shoreline residential, both designation and now we can see zoning is as well. So the official plan and the zoning bylaw are identical as far as the southerly portion of the property towards the lake being protected and the lands closer to the road being developable. There were no issues that were submitted as a result of interdepartmental consultation with all municipal departments. The Conservation Authority didn't have a particular issue with the redevelopment proposal. The builder on file, Derek Seaman, has been working closely with members of the Conservation Authority, has been made aware of their design criteria when building in the hazard demonstrated by its location and proximity to the lake. This is a property that's subject to their development regulations and will require a permit prior to the issuance of a building permit. We didn't receive any comments as part of our public consultation period on circulating this rezoning application. After receiving the complete application, we sent out information to both the agencies as well as property owners within 400 feet of the property identified by that map. Again, no comments were submitted prior to publishing the report. However, staff in our department did receive some correspondence from an adjacent landowner, which was brought to my attention. And there's an opportunity for that property owner to, at this forum, this public meeting, to air their comments, should there be a need for that, in my understanding. And perhaps I'll just pull up here that identifies it as the abutting property owner to the east. And there is some question that has been raised as to the lot lines and the boundaries of the property, and potentially the encroachment of the new dwelling or the reconstructed dwelling onto the neighboring lot. As part of the application submission, the Planning Department did receive a surveyor's real property report that was prepared in anticipation of the zoning application. That real property report is available to the public, and I believe it has been shared with the neighbor. It's an interesting predicament, certainly, because when we look at the original assessment mapping, of which we still have a copy, it's very yellowed and ripped in places. However, it shows the original lot configuration on Plan 443, which is what this area is known to be. However, when comparing that plan with the surveyor's real property report, we do see an identical lot configuration on the original plan for this area, as well as what the surveyor was able to pin in the ground as part of determining the lot boundaries. But we certainly encourage further conversation with the neighbors, and also have suggested that it may be of interest for them to obtain a survey for their property as well. So we are here for information purposes. We have not come to you with a recommendation on this application. We'd like to obtain any comments made from the Planning Committee as well as from the public. When we do come back to this body with a subsequent recommendation after reviewing all the comments that have been submitted, at that time we will prepare a bylaw for your consideration and a schedule which delineates the line between the EP zone and the revised residential zone.
Excuse me, thank you. Does any member of the committee have any questions for Leah? Start with you, Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question and a comment. For a point of clarification, you said that the original survey, the survey on file, and the surveyor's report were all indicating the same property line? So there's no dispute?
Mr. Chair, through you, that's right. There's no dispute in our understanding of where the lot lines are based on those two documents.
Okay. And this is, just for clarification also, this is in Saugeen, this former Saugeen Township? Foley?
Mr. Chair, yes it is.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Did you have a question now? Councillor Minaj.
I don't know, Mr. Mayor, thank you. It's more of a large questions and comments, and Leah afforded me an opportunity to speak with her today about the topic. But I'm wondering if at some point this property has caught my eye and interest in the respect to climate change controls. We talk about site plan controls, but what about climate change controls? And what do I mean by that? Well, Toronto Island is almost half underwater now, and there's more of that potentially coming. So we don't get that the land, this particular land, is, we don't get information as far as I know. Maybe the survey does, that says that this land is 5 feet above mean lake level, or it's bedrock. It's built on sand, and whether we should be permitting basements to be built, or whether houses should be on stilts like they are in other parts of the world, whether we should be considering that this should be buffered with a retaining wall against the encroaching lake as it continues to come. And the reason I ask that is, at some point, is somebody going to say we ought to have known and we shouldn't have continued to approve without recommending changes and some sort of liability insurance risk against the municipality in the future that says now we've got a real issue here. We got land in an EP zone, albeit we approved it in the past, and I certainly want to approve it again. But I just want to know, where are we headed in the future with all of these types of considerations? And if it's just me blowing hot air, then say so. And if it has any fact-based consideration, then maybe we should look further.
You go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't comment on blowing any hot air, certainly outside my
Oh, go ahead. There's lots of it in this chambers.
In terms of liability, I won't speak to insurance matters, but I will mention that overall, the EP zone is an area that's recognized as having hazards, and the hazards vary depending on where they're located. They could speak to shoreline uprush, they could speak to dynamic beach, they could speak to any number of elements related to floodplain. So at a high level, the EP zone, no new residential construction. One of the factors in considering rebuilding in exactly the same footprint is whether there can be improvements made to the existing home that don't further exacerbate or threaten or increase the risk with that home continuing to be in that location. And that's the design element and the engineered site plan requirements that the owner will be sort of subject to following out.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I might go in slightly in the opposite direction from Councilman Hodge. I just wonder, what interest are we serving by keeping these, particularly the building envelopes on these lots zoned EP? Why aren't they just zoned? Why do we put people through this process of making them get these rezoned? We're never going to, they're going to tear down this building. We were never going to force them to revert it back to a natural state. We were always going to, I believe, my guess is this council was always going to allow them to build again. And I would hazard to guess we would always allow people to rebuild their houses in these spots, yet we force them to rezone to do that. What is the municipal interest that we're serving with this process?
For you. Maybe a couple of elements there. One, going through a public process does notify the surrounding property owners that there is some change being proposed. That's number one. It also gives, it's a form of education, which is at some points helpful, and it leads to transparency in the process too, as far as what the relationship is between the various commenting bodies and all the different pieces of both locally and otherwise, how they impact private property rights, and finding that point at which we reconcile the public interest with private property rights. What is the point of a zoning bylaw? One of its main objectives is to protect the community, and to go a step further, lead to some consistency and some expectation from the community as to what can be built where. There hasn't been a thorough survey or analysis done of the shoreline properties, or for that matter, I'd offer any properties across the municipality. Where there have been some more comprehensive studies, like, for example, there's a portion of Southampton in the shoreline where there is detailed floodplain mapping. That was done a number of years ago, where we actually see the EP zone line staggered, and it follows the rear, let's say, building walls, sometimes decks, and recognizes, because there's been work that's been done on the ground, but that hasn't happened across the entire municipality. And until something that's sort of that thorough has been done, it might be short-sighted to sort of do an en masse rezoning of every residential property, meaning every property that has a residence on it, that is zoned EP, and simply converting it out of the hazard without looking at, is it zoned appropriately, and what actually is the hazard? What we do know is that hazards move from time to time. Sometimes they become eliminated, but sometimes they further exacerbate, meaning the hazard actually becomes more dangerous. So it's an opportunity, a checks and balances, if you will, to look at these on a site-specific basis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for that explanation. My own view is that we impose too high a cost on the individual here for the community good that we are receiving. I was interested to hear you say enhanced mapping would help this. This is an area, I look at the Director of Development, and Director of Development, when I say this is an area perhaps we could look at for enhanced floodplain mapping, something the Conservation Authority is very interested in engaging in. I think all these property owners in here, the outcome is already known in these locations of any one of these properties. If they were to tear their house down in the same situation as this and come to us and ask for permission to do that, would get that permission. The outcome is known. So the process is onerous, overly onerous as a result of that, in my view. So I think if enhanced floodplain mapping is what we need to give some confidence to the planners to come back with a recommendation to put all these into a residential zoning, then we should do that, and this is an area we should look at to do that in, and perhaps other areas similar to this along the shoreline. I think it can be done in fairly short order and ought to be done. And I'd also, I guess, just specifically to this development, the idea of having half the house remaining in the EP and half of it outside the EP seems very strange to me. I think that what I would like to see if and when it returns is to see it all in the residential zone, so that the whole thing can be recognized for what it is, something that can and ought to be able to be rebuilt in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chair, if I could add a comment that it will become part of our recommendation and our further discussion with the Conservation Authority, that actually be the case, that this is a site-specific analysis and it only makes sense to follow the footprint because of the amount of work that the owners have done.
Thank you. Do you want to comment to it, Bart? Go ahead.
Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority is doing a review of the mapping, and this area is included in that.
Thank you. Any other committee members' questions about the report? If not, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak to this application? Or have any questions? Anybody would like to speak to it? Comments to it? No? Okay. If you want to, just come to the mic and Derek, just let everybody know who you are. Sure. There's a little blue button there. You're going to have to stick it pretty straight up.
Just a comment to what Leah mentioned about the issue with the property line. Even if the property line was where the one neighbor thinks it is, the house, it still doesn't affect where the layout of the house is. It wouldn't encroach anywhere, even if the property line was moved, which I don't think it's going to be. But I just thought I'd bring that up. It won't affect the application for setback reasons.
Thank you.
That was it.
Any other member from the public would like to speak to this application? If not, then thank you. So we will be dealing with the recommendation, I suspect, at our next planning meeting in a month's time. So the next item item on the agenda is, again, it's a zoning bylaw amendment, Z16-77.44 for Brandon and Shauna Stauffer, and it's for 5272 Bruce Road 3. And again, our planner will present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have a rezoning application, essentially to facilitate the severance of a new building lot. The purpose of this zoning application is to do two things. One, to permit a reduced agricultural lot area, and also to permit a reduced frontage in the agricultural zone. Now, the precursor to this zoning application is actually a county official plan amendment, of which there was a circulation process, a public statutory meeting. And essentially, I am here to both express the details of the rezoning component of this proposal and also to go a step further and provide you with a recommendation, simply because there were no issues at the official plan application stage. There were no objections from the agencies or from the public, and there were no public submissions made at the first statutory public meeting as it related to the official plan amendment. Approval of the zoning bylaw amendment application will in fact implement the approval of the county's official plan. That was done on May 4th, 2017. So the property itself is an oversized, in the sense of underutilized, non-farm residential lot. It takes its frontage off of Bruce Road 3. It is bound by a golf course and golf course-related activities to the north, by other residential non-farm uses on the other sides, and some agricultural activities as well. Private well and septic, they service the existing home and are proposed to service the new residential building lot to the east of the existing dwelling. Here's a site plan prepared by the agent working for the property owner, Mr. Stopper. The agent's Cuesta Planning Consultants. We can see the structures as they relate to the parcel that the owner would be retaining, as well as the configuration of the parcel to be severed. We did take a look at all the relevant planning land use policies from the provincial level to the county level, as well as the Saugeen Shores zoning bylaw. This is outside of the Saugeen Shores local official plan coverage area, so only basing our evaluation on the county official plan. The lands in this sort of cluster of non-farm residential uses were subject to a previous site-specific process a number of years ago. And that resulted in converting or redesignating the lands from rural, which is how they were designated, into a site-specific policy area that accommodated additional new residential building lots. So that's an important aspect in terms of the ability to consider rezoning to accommodate an additional residential lot, because there already are special policies attached to this parcel of land. Municipal staff provided that should the lot be approved by the county, as is typically the case for new building lots, that a 5% cash in lieu of parkland dedication would be required. If the lot's approved, there is also a requirement that a 1 foot or 0.3 meter reserve along the frontage of the Lynx Side Road be included, and that would prevent any new access points coming from the Lynx. Those are conditions of approval that are typically associated with the subsequent consent application that would be circulated pending the decision of zoning, not bylaw amendment. There were no issues or concerns raised by any of the agencies, certainly just for matters of information. The Conservation Authority raised the information about significant natural heritage features adjacent to and surrounding the property. An environmental impact study is not required, permitting a new residential building lot because of the element of disturbance of the property. No public comments, as was stated, both on the official plan amendment, but also as circulation of this zoning application to property owners within 200 feet. Property. So although there was substantial public consultation, we did not receive any comments. Here we are this evening at the statutory public meeting required zoning bylaw amendment application. Once council makes a decision, there will be a 20-day appeal period, and only after that period of time, should the zoning be approved, can we proceed with the subsequent severances. So to recap, we are looking at amending the minimum lot area and frontage requirements to enable the creation of a new residential non-farm lot. Minimum lot area would be both 0.53 hectares for the new vacant lot, slightly larger to accommodate required setbacks and the structures that already exist on the retained lot. Proper 0.84 hectares, as well dropping down from the 100-meter requirement for lot frontage to 36.6 on the parcel and 58.
Thank you, Leah. Has committee any questions for Leah? Councillor Minaj.
Mayor, so we just went through Committee of Adjustment looking at a piece of property that has an original home, and it was to be severed into two other lots. So I wasn't sure I fully understood all the rules and regulations on septic tanks, Lynx Side Roads, but to me this looked like if you wanted to intensify anywhere, you would have drawn a line across the top of the property too and severed a lot. I can't do it without actually showing you what I meant. But so it's severed in two blocks this way. But why not cut one across the top and sever it three ways and have another driveway onto the Lynx Side Road? Like, so my point would be: Are we getting the? I'm sure that if are we getting, as a municipality, are we getting the most out of the lot severance discussion, let alone the owners of the property? So what's the answer?
So I've just brought up, Mr. Chair, through you, Councilor Minaj, the aerial of existing uses on the property. So we can see that there is already some disturbance in former use that we'll make use of in the north portion of the property. We have to be cognizant of not just the owner's preferences. Certainly there's an opportunity through to negotiate whether there is opportunity for a higher intensification. But we also have to be cognizant of the policy framework with respect to there is a sort of highest level of density, and the creation of this lot in between two existing residential houses has been determined to be the highest and best use of this.
Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Leah, could you, you may have said it in your presentation, but just confirm there's no city water and no sewer on these properties?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And how long has it been since these properties were zoned A, agriculture?
Mr. Chair, that's a good one. They, as far as the zoning bylaws for Saugeen Township before amalgamation are concerned, I am aware that they were already zoned at that point. So certainly before 2000. If it adds to the conversation, the previous round of official plan amendment applications predate my time at the county. So that was more than 15 years ago when the former owner created a number of those lots at that time. The egg zoning, certainly come back with that information, unless there is a reason why you're asking that. Maybe I can answer in a different way.
I was just wondering how it came about that these clearly agricultural properties became special R zone properties. If it's before your time, that's fine.
I think I understand. And what we are looking at are, and yes, agricultural, but the policy framework, in fact, put these lots into a rural designation, which has more flexible consent severance policies versus the agricultural designation, which are subject to. And maybe when it's in slideshow, anyway, the distinction between agricultural, thank you, Linda, and rural is the quality of the farm soils, and it's distinguished by ag lands being the prime class 1, 2, and 3 soils, whereas the rural lands are the classes 4 through 7. And that's what enables the county plan to have some more permissive and, let's say, flexible or lenient severance policies on rural lands, which that pocket of land outside the golf were given. Now that goes back to 1972, 1969 with the provincial soils mapping, the lands, Canadian land inventory for soils.
They rated them in their categories of 1 to 8.
Yes.
Right.
And some even more differences amongst the 1 through 8,
yes,
based on
subcategories.
how rocky they are, how much clay there is, how wet they are.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Leah, could you go back to the aerial view for a moment, please? Is there one other lot next to the house, or does the house that's next to it own that whole property?
Mr. Chair, through you, what I'm just taking a look at is the assessment mapping inside the committee report. It's in the chart, top of page. Interestingly enough, I don't see a page number.
That's the notice.
It is the notice, isn't it? Middle of page 3. There is no civic addressing on the lot to the east of where the proposed severed parcel is. So that in and of itself is a building lot ready to go, but has not been developed yet.
Okay, so there'd be 2 empty lots then if we sever the Stauffer lot and then the one next to it.
And in fact, there might be an additional lot beside it as you continue east. The civic addressing starts maybe 4 or 5 lots to the east.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just looking at this, and it just occurs to me, and maybe you could just click this. There's probably a simple answer to this, and I'm not understanding it. Why do we need the 3 foot? Why now do we need the 3 foot reserve along the Link Side Road? The lot we're creating is not on the Link Side Road, and there's already access onto the Link Side Road, and the new lot would have to cross somebody else's property to get there. I'm just wondering what is the reasoning for the 3 foot reserve?
Well, the reason we were asking for it is that we wanted to ensure that there weren't additional entrances on the Link Side Road, even though they might just be serving the existing dwelling. It was an opportunity to restrict it further, just to make sure they didn't have another one, or that at least the one that's there doesn't meander around the site. It's optimized where we would like it at this moment.
It would be a 1 foot reserve too, right?
I wasn't worried about the number, but yeah, the reserve of some small amount.
That's all right. Any other questions from the committee? If not, then anyone from the public would like to speak to this. Please come up to the mic and let us know who you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Nick Kohek, and I am from Cuesta Planning Consultants in Owen Sound. I am here on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Brandon Stouffer, who is at the back in the audience with us today. Mr. Stouffer owns a rural residential parcel that it includes a house and also that barn structure in the rear of the property. The parcel is located in an area of rural residential lots, both to the west, the east, and there's a couple across the street as well on some crown parcels. Mr. Stouffer wishes to sever the eastern portion of the parcel, which is presently vacant, and that would allow for the highest and best use the best use of that land in consideration of its small size. Now, the provincial policy statement, it allows for limited residential development in rural areas. As this proposal involves the creation of a single lot, that would constitute limited, and the creation of the lot is by infilling according to the PPS. So, again, it would comply with that policy. There are a number of there are a few nearby agricultural and rural economic activities, but they won't be constrained by an additional house in this area. There are numerous other residences surrounding the property. The subject lands are included under a special agricultural zoning designation, prescribing a minimum lot area of 1.3 hectares and a minimum lot frontage of 94.6 hectares. The zoning bylaw amendment will recognize the new minimum lot sizes and minimum lot frontages for the severed and retained lots. The proposed property sizes are similar in size to the surrounding lots, and they're large enough to accommodate private services that would comply with Ontario Building Code setbacks. Now, there was some talk during the meeting about the 0.3 meter reserve on the Link Side Road area of the property, which is, the town wants to put the 0.3 reserve, except for the driveway entrance area, and we suggest that the condition may be a bit excessive, as there is no entrance proposed in this location and the retained lands are already built on. We believe that further access on Link Side Road is already controlled through the driveway permit process, and that is sufficient for any additional entrances on that side. We do concur with the recommendation for approval by county staff, and we respectfully request approval of the subject amendment. Thanks for your time. Brandon and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Any questions of this? Thank you. So, if there's no other questions or comments, then there's a recommendation. It's recommended that the zoning bylaw amendment Z-16-17.44 be approved, and that Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores adopts the draft bylaw attached. Any discussion on the bylaw, the motion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the staff report, and it has to do with some zoning bylaw amendments, and I believe Jay is going to make a presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And like the height report from a couple months ago, where we staff and asked the committee to explore some of the issues that were important to address when developments were coming in with greater height, we're bringing forward sort of the next in the series, as I promised then. This is the next one where this time we're looking at specifically residential built form. And in this particular case, where it's different from our height report, is that we actually have actionable recommendations herein, where we're looking, when we think we have provided we're looking for flexibility in our zoning bylaw while balancing and maintaining the character and the policy attributes that we've developed over the last many years through official plan and design guidelines. So, and these are the particularly for residential built form, apart from the chicken amendment, and I'll get to that. But I just wanted to highlight that say the first request is that for yard requirements for accessory structures, we're looking for at least the smaller accessory structures, and in here it's at buildings less than or equal to 600 square feet approximately, that we are of the opinion that the setback requirement of 5 feet can be reduced to 4 feet, that there is very little change in the character or compatibility with surrounding lands. I should correct myself with the compatibility, not necessarily character, the compatibility, as the policies say, but that it allows for the flexibility in the homeowner to take advantage of the additional yard space. A foot doesn't sound like much, but it's a foot nevertheless, given the smaller lots that are being proposed and approved all the time. So this additional foot can allow for play space for children, barbecue pads, decks, etc. And just as a way, as a comment here, is that we recommended this to Planning Committee. Sorry, am I... Your question?
Just can you get the microphone so everybody, we're online, sorry. Turn it on.
You said 600 square feet, but the report we have says 60 square meters.
Yes, it's about 60 square
about
meters.
The same?
Yeah, I think it's 620 square feet, 60 meters. That's amendment number 1 that we're seeking. Amendment 2 is the restrictions on poultry in urban areas. It's not related to this series. We're just implementing the bylaw 42/2017, cleaning up the other bylaws that are, and one of them is the zoning bylaw where there's a prohibition. Well, we need to rewrite that to say that it's the provisions of bylaw 42/2017 that apply to chickens in the urban area. Similarly, to the first one, provisions for driveways, we're looking for providing a bit more flexibility. Homeowners' cars don't generally get smaller, but with the lots being smaller, they still need a place to put them. So it's recommended that we allow up to 40% of lot frontages to be occupied by driveways and parking spaces rather than the existing 40% restriction. Provisions for uncovered decks. There's a current permission to allow for deck encroachments into the rear yard setback of only 1.5 meters. So that means that if someone wanted to build their house to the 7.5 meter setback in the rear, they would only be able to put a 1.5 meter wide deck. And we feel that given the current environment, that's not nearly enough for the type of outdoor amenity space that people want, and that having an additional encroachment of this case of only 3 meters does not change the compatibility with surrounding lands. And finally, the general setbacks, side yard setbacks for R1, R2, and R3 zones. That's generally your single detached, semi-detached townhouse zones. Like the accessory structures, reducing the setback from 5 feet to 4 feet is appropriate. And you can see in the photographs that are provided, it'd be hard, I was hard pressed to tell the difference, taking a view from the property at approximately the same distance from, and these are actually buildings built in town, so we don't have to look very far to show that this example already exists. Comments we received so far, at least one written comment, well, only one written comment from a builder saying he's continuing to see pressure on lot setbacks from his clients as retirees want bungalow-style housing, so in other words, the wider housing, and families look to maintain as much outdoor amenity space as possible. So providing for the flexibility as recommended in his view. Haven't got any comments from agencies, but following this meeting, we'll come back with a report consolidating any comments we receive, any at a future meeting with a specific analysis and recommendation.
Thank you, Jay. So I'll read the recommendation, and then we can have some discussion. It's recommended that Council receive this report as information. Comments received from the public and Council will be considered when forming a recommendation to be presented at a subsequent meeting. Sorry, any discussion? Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment on the accessory structures, and I'm just wondering if there's any appetite around this table to go with the 1 meter setback for accessory structures. And I agree with the statement about additional backyard play space, recreational space. I dare say, if you drive around the community, I'm wondering how many sheds right now are 0.6 meters or 1 meter or less, whereas they shouldn't be. Should be meeting our requirements of the 1.5. But I'm just wondering, if it's just, if we're going to continue to maybe look at minor variance applications for accessory structures. I look at City of Barrie, 0.6 meters, 2 feet. Blue Mountains, 0.6 meter. Owen Sound has a 1 meter, which is 3 feet. I don't know whether there's a right or wrong here, but I'm just thinking, the 1.2, the 1.2 meter just gives you about 3.94 feet. And I just wonder if we should be taking a look at the 1 meter, 3 feet, to provide people with more backyard living space. That space you lose, on the side, and some of the argument around the table may be getting too close to your neighbor, but I think if you drive around town, I think a lot of these accessory structures like sheds and so on are already 2 or 3 feet. Some of them. To avoid minor variance applications in the future, Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering if there's an appetite around the table to go to the 1 meter, and I'd like to hear the comments from around the table.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Myatt, and first and foremost, I'm really pleased to see the direction you guys are heading with this report. I think it's really great. I just think you're not going far enough. I think that you talk about buffering, and the City of Owen Sound is the example you use, and they're able to build into their plan buffering or mitigation measures that enable them to be at 1 meter. I think you could build in mitigation or buffering measures to eliminate the setback altogether. Those measures, there are measures that exist to make that possible. And so I think you just have, again, more recently, I think I'm thinking about this process from end to end. And you see at the end result, somebody gets too close to the property line. They come for a minor variance. They get their requisite sort of tisk from the committee, and then they get the variance, because nobody's going to order them to take the building down, and it turns out to be fine in the end. And so then it makes you question what are we doing here? Why are we going through this rigmarole when what we could do much more easily without putting them through that situation is give them some buffering options that they could work with staff to develop, or mitigation measures, and maybe even have a sliding scale. The closer you are, the more severe those mitigation measures have to be. But you can, there's a reasonable way to handle that, and everybody will be fine. And the neighborhood's character's not the right word, but it will remain intact, and everything will be fine. And I would encourage you. I don't know necessarily exactly where the sweet spot is in terms of that number, but I would encourage you to try to get as close to zero as you can with mitigation measures that make that possible, and try to avoid some of these minor situations, these minor variant situations that we get into, where really what we end up doing is arbitrating between two neighbors who just don't like each other very much and are having a dispute about something totally different, and we end up involved in a fight over a shed that isn't even the center of the issue. So let's see what we can do to get to eliminate as much as possible these restrictions and get out of the minor variance business and into the business of letting things go on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'll have to on the opposite side of the Deputy Mayor. No surprise here. So my neighbor installed a steel roof on their home, and 3 or 4 winters ago, all the ice built up on the steel roof, and it slid off in one big, huge chunk and demolished the fence between us. And if I'd had a garage there with a window, it would have gone right through the window as well. So there's a reason for having all of these widths between homes and between buildings and structures. And so I would ask that we look outside of the box a little bit and not just think that it's how close we can get and be acceptable, but to what were the risk management ideas and concepts we had in the beginning. Back to the fire chief, how much room does he need? Back to the installation of utilities and where they're located, and certainly the difference between having 2 tons of ice come off a steel roof and whether or not, if a child had been out there at the same time, whether or not they would have fared as well as the fence did. And these are the reasons why some of this building code is put together and setbacks are put together. And so I would like us to at least measure that against the idea that you have, Luke, and I'm not against you. I just think that we've got to look at all of the different varieties of reasons that allow us to get close and keep us apart. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Dave Maya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and very quickly, I too would support the idea that Councillor Maya brought forward, is that reducing the setbacks to 1 meter and increasing people's flexibility to do on their properties what they need to do is the way we should be going. Personal stories, when I built my accessory structure, I was told I needed 25 meters setback from the property line, 75 feet from a 50-acre cornfield. So I know how encroachments are important, and we need to be more flexible than less. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on this? I think you've heard some discussion on it. So we'll...
Far be it for me to impose how to run the
Sure.
meeting. This is a zoning bylaw amendment public meeting, where there would be an opportunity for public comment if
That's correct.
needed. So.
But at one point there will be when you come back with a proposed amendment, right?
What's that?
Oh, in here? Yeah. Oh, okay. Did you want to speak again, Mike, before I've got to... Go ahead.
How we handle that then, like I've heard 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 members of council say they maybe would like the 1 meter. I don't know how the other councillors feel. Where do we go from here on that?
Well, I'm going to ask anybody in the public first, and then we'll deal with that, Mike. Okay, anybody in the public would like to speak to this particular report? Stuart. Let's go ahead.
Stuart Doyle, Barry's Construction. Just want to thank council and staff for having this meeting tonight. It's been a nice change to have the forums. The developer's been able to come in and speak with your economic development officer and your development department about some of our different ideas and how we can want to work together on some of them. Just one brief comment on this report. I would ask that council would consider that the driveway amendment also apply to single-family homes, not just restrict that to townhouses and semi-detached units. With the densities changing, some of the lots, single-family lots, are also becoming less than 15 meters, and as the bylaw reads now, if it's less than 15 meters, it's 40%. If it's over 15 meters, it's up to 7.5 meters. So there's a significant drop once you go from under 15 meters. This bylaw addresses that for townhouses and semi-detached. I would just add that council consider it for single-family homes as well. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Hi, I'm Brian Snyder from Snyder Development, and I just wanted to say that I support basically all these changes that you're talking about here. I think I have a subdivision a phase of subdivision up on Brentwood that basically got approved for 1.2 meter side setbacks, 4 feet. There's 20 lots there, and we've never had any problems. The grade on those lots, it changes too, so it's, it's trickier in a lot of situations, but like we've actually had no issues with it. It's been, a good subdivision. Down in Walkerton, also we've done a 93 lot subdivision down there, and it was, they've always had 1.2 meter setbacks, so I just wanted to say I think you're on the right track.
Thank you. Any further comments from the public? No? Councilman Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I thought that Mr. Doyle's comment about single-family residents in the driveways, is that something then we can ask staff to look at and incorporate and bring back in a revision?
Yeah, I think we'll deal with both those issues in a kind of a show of hands here to give staff some direction. So I guess the first one, what your suggestion, Mike, is that we go from 1.2 to 1 meters. Okay. Go ahead. Yep.
Could I ask council to give some further flexibility to staff to see if they to look how low they can go on that number reasonably with mitigation measures instead of giving them 1 as the number? Would that be possible? How low can you go?
Oh, okay, we can, sure. Anybody want to talk? I'll speak to it. I think you need some setback. How do you maintain a building when there is no setback and you don't get along with your neighbor? And you're on the property line, and that happens more than you would understand in this community where neighbors cannot get along. And so I think there's a good reason for some setback. Is 1 meter or 2 meters or 1.2 meters? I'm not hung up on that, but I think there's a very good reason for that. If you want to try and get lower than that, I'm not sure I support it. Bart.
The building code actually gets very restrictive after 1 meter. So when we talk about houses or we talk about accessory structures, when you get less than 1 meter, then you start really dealing with fire separations and amount of openings, and the permit process and the review of permits become a lot more difficult. Even with small buildings, this can be a challenge. You can have one neighbor who has a lot of windows at 1 meter, and the next neighbor is then restricted to have no windows, and so there's a bit of a snowball effect after 1 meter. So that's why we kind of used 1.2 as kind of our benchmark, because it kept us out of that. And also the other part of that was that when we did our review of the zoning bylaw, we looked at things that we could peel away. So when we did that review, we decided that we understood from all the other applications for variances that if we did these 5 or 4 things, we could get rid of about 40 to 50% of our applications for variances. And we felt that was actually a really good thing. And so that's why we kind of came up with the numbers we did, and that's where we're kind of at. I mean, if you want to go to accessory structures at 1 meter, I think you can do that. You can do anything you want. It's just a matter of how onerous you want to make it on the other end. And by meaning owners, I'm talking about having garages that are now have 1 hour firewalls or fire separations in them, and telling people that you have to use 5/8 drywall and you have to use non-combustible materials, and it just becomes a little different. The game changes at these tighter numbers, and the building code is very, very specific about this. So it's not something that this council can say if this council wanted to, we could have 0 lot lines. Beyond that, the design and the construction of those structures will become very different than what we're normally used to. But we just have to keep that kind of back of mind.
Okay. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just a follow-up question for Bart. So am I hearing that staff really doesn't feel as comfortable with 1 as 1.2?
I think staff like 1.2, and we offered that number. But if the council decides that 1 meter is the number that they're really happy with, we can do that. But below 1 meter, then we start becoming really difficult with how we design these buildings and how we get them through a permit process that, for the most part, many people struggle with already because it's not easy. And so when we're talking about small buildings of 600 or 60 meters less, you know, those are projects that most people try to do on their own. They don't want to hire experts. They don't want to hire people to actually get them through the process. And when you start making them do those things to go through the process, it's because they'll not understand what fire separations are and not understand, you know, spatial separations, and knowing that you can only have so many windows opening and openings and facing a property line. It just becomes more difficult. And it's not unattainable. It's just more difficult. And I'm just trying to say, for the average person who's applying for a permit, who wants a small shed in their backyard, you know, 1.2 meters or 1 meter is great. 0.6, yeah, you can do it. It's just more difficult.
Councilor Minaj.
I'm just reminded of the Circle K site plan where they asked for a much lower number between lots, and we came to an agreement that the number would be larger so that they could physically access the rear of their property, the south side of their property, and maintain and paint their structures without having to access the other person's lot next door. So at some point, when you get to be my size, you'd need 4 feet to work with to be able to paint the side of your structure without going over to your neighbor's.
Okay, so I guess the suggestion is that we go to 1 meter, unless somebody wants to change it. So then I'm going to ask the question. All in favor of 1 meter? Opposed? That fails. That's tied, right? So it fails. So the next item then is the driveway issue. And the question there is, do we apply it also to single-family homes? The 7.5 or 40%? 50% of the lot frontage, sorry. Any discussion on this issue? All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. So I think then back to I guess that to the main question, which is just a comment, so that we're not asked again that question. So we've kind of amended it with 2 amendments, but all in favor of the recommendation. That's carried. Thank you. So we have one other report, and it's a deeming staff report, and it's a deeming bylaw. Oops, sorry. Yep. Correct. It failed. So it goes back to what was recommended in the report, which is 1.2. Or it was a tie, so it fails. That's all right. I mumble sometimes. I know I mumble sometimes. So the next is a staff report. It has to do with the deeming bylaw, and again, our development coordinator, Jay Posner, will present it.
Yes, thank you. This is a deeming bylaw, and I'm not sure how many people recall how the deeming bylaw system works, but I'll draw your attention first to the subject lands. This highlighted in red in the map. Mr. Don Jack, who's in attendance, I think, still has decided to stay. He owns 2 lots on Piccadilly and Highland, and in owning those lands over the past 15, 20 years, excuse me, he's made a request to be able to build onto his existing structure, or essentially get building permits for the second lot, but he wouldn't be able to do that given the zoning bylaw restrictions and the fact that you can't have an accessory structure on a vacant lot. So one option, that rather than a variance, which is still constraining to the existing house, he's asked for a deeming bylaw. So a deeming bylaw, if passed, would allow lots under the same ownership to merge. So we're recommending that the deeming bylaw be passed for the following reasons. It allows for more building on the site without the need for further planning relief. That the orientation of the building treats Piccadilly as the front yard, so therefore the rear yard as the house is oriented is very, very small, at least in a technical sense. And of course the rear yard is the vacant lot, but in being able to get an addition, you would permit lawful use of the second lot as a rear yard. In other words, to be able to build an accessory structure. And that the third reason is that the corner lot is undersized in comparison to other corner lots. At the time of its creation I'll have to recall, about 20 years ago, they didn't consider the corner lot, and I don't know why, and didn't apply for it to be 60 feet wide, for example. So that it's just like any other lot that does restrict where you can locate structures on the property, because the exterior side yard is greater on corner lots than any interior lot. So those are the reasons for our recommendation.
Thank you, Jay. The recommendation is that Council pass a bylaw to deem Lot 5 on Plan 3M-156 and Lot 22 on Plan 3M-179 as not in a plan of subdivision. Any questions or comments to this? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jay, is this something that it would be appropriate to inform neighbors about this application?
Well, there's no legal requirement to notify landowners.
Any further questions? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Once it's deemed into one lot, through you to Jay or possibly Leah, in the event that they wish to revert back to two lots, it's a whole brand new application process?
I believe you can't just repeal the deeming bylaw, and maybe Leah can correct me. You'd have to apply for consent or part lot to recreate this.
As each lot stands by itself, it probably has rights to a driveway to the different street accesses. So is this going, as it's merged into one, will it be restricted to the one driveway, or will it now be allowed to have a secondary driveway to a secondary building on the merged piece of lot?
I think as we've treated other corner lots, you could get a second driveway. I'd have to confirm the amount of frontage, but it probably qualifies for a second driveway on the one on Highland, one on Piccadilly.
Any further questions? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? That's carried. So that is the end of our agenda this evening. So a motion to adjourn. Mike and Don, all in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you.